Hello, my name's Stephen Gronell and this is Energy Medicine's podcast, and today we're looking at habits. Habits is something that I have to discuss with all of my clients, and they're an integral part to you getting better. So why are habits so important? Well, habits control roughly 95% of our life. Scarily, our life runs on autopilot. It isn't that we're not in control, it's just that lots of subroutines, so things that we do automatically, we do out of habit. So we drive to work, we drive the similar route, we drive in the same way, we drive the same car, we process all the information, and we do most of that automatically. We get into the office, we might sit at the same desk, we might have the same sort of clothes on because it's Monday, we might have a meeting on a Monday. So lots of stuff is lots and lots of subroutines, so things that we do automatically. So these are called habits. So why are they so important? Well, habits are really important because if you had to think about everything every time you did something, you wouldn't get very far because nothing's on autopilot. So if every time you got into your car to learn to drive, you would have to then start at the beginning, go through the process of learning to drive, and then drive to work. Well, that just wouldn't work, would it, in reality? And that would be the same with any skill. So turning a computer on, learning something at school, going to pick something from the shops, all those skills are all automatic. So they're things we do out of habit, and they're all subroutines in our brain. So we do things at certain times of the day, we do other things certain times of the week or certain times of the month. So we tend not to go on a summer holiday in the winter. So we tend to do things seasonally. If it's raining, we're less likely to go out for a walk. If it's sunny, we're more likely to go out for a walk. So certain habits are fostered with different environments. All of these things are important because on a rehabilitation journey, invariably we have to change something. And I do a lot of changes with people with walking. So a lot of stuff is around movement and mobility, and it's helping people with knee problems, feet problems, and lower back problems. So those three areas all rely on some level of posture change. And in doing that, you've got to change something that somebody's been doing for at least 12 months because they've been compensating. And in most cases, it's something they've been doing their whole life. So that habit, that movement, that routine is all in one sort of process. So if it's to do with walking and you walk a particular way and say one of your feet is slightly turned out and you're having ankle problems, then obviously one of the things that I would do is want you to have your foot straight, but you've got to get out of the habit and get out of the routine of walking with your foot in this position and then learn how to walk with it in this position. Now the reason that that's important is obviously it changes the loading, it changes how the muscles work, it's more efficient, it takes pressure and pain away, so it helps reduce pain and it helps increase mobility. All of those things are great and people can understand it mentally, and when I see them in the clinic or when I speak to them online, they can all talk about it conceptually, and everybody can do it for a short period of time. And then when they leave the clinic, when they finish the call, when they go and do something, everything then kicks into automatic pilot. So they start walking and moving exactly as they were because they're not used to thinking about something consciously. So how do we change that? How do we make something that we've done for a long period of time automatic? The key thing is it takes time, patience, and to do it in small little bits. The reason I stress that is that if you make a 1% change every single day for a year, you'll be 37 times better at something. So mathematically, if you improve by 1% over a year, you'll be 37 times better at something. So if that's walking and that's changing how you walk and how you move, and all you've got to do is twist your foot so it's straight, small changes on a daily basis over a much shorter period of time, so over a few weeks, that will become more automatic. Okay, that makes sense. I can live with that. And you can do the same with more complex movements. But how do you integrate changes into your habits? There's a couple of things you can do. So I work very much on getting people to do additional movements. I call them homework, but I get people to do that and to make a habit of doing that at the same point in the day, every day of the week. So as opposed to saying, oh, do them, daily, 3 times, whatever, I work on once, a minimum standard. And I want people to do things first thing in the morning when they get up. So if they're working, if they've got kids, if they're on a weekend, at some point during first thing in the morning, you get up, you pop the kettle on and you make a cup of tea. That's a perfect time to do any rehabilitation movements. It's not necessarily the best time, but it's the perfect time to ensure that you do them, because that is usually a consistent thing that you do every single day of the week, regardless of what the other tasks are. So the rest of life doesn't get in the way. So I try and get people to associate that process of first thing in the morning to do some movement, some activity and tasks. And I found that to be really successful. People can really relate to the fact that it's something they can get into a routine quite quickly. So even if they go on holiday, they can still get up, they might have a drink first. It's the first thing that they're almost doing. So that makes a big difference to compliance with working towards changing something or doing something differently. It's the same with walking. I really stress any changes that I make with walking are done consciously and deliberately. So I get people to do things for a certain amount of time. And I've talked a lot about a 3, 6 and a 9-minute walk test. So different levels of rehabilitation would require either a 3-minute, a 6-minute or a 9-minute walk. Again, it's a very short, focused piece of time. And I try and get people to do that with a level of regularity. So it's at a certain time or at a certain point in the week or on a certain day or on a certain evening. That way, it's much more likely that you'll do it and you'll do it regularly. And in doing an activity regularly and practicing, it will mean that you get better and better. The other challenge with habits is that 95% of your life is on autopilot. You can't change lots of habits in one go because it's too much of your life as a change. So what you need to do is break down things and focus on 1 or 2 things as the most important aspects. So it's looking very much at, okay, how can I make this an obvious change? So if we talk about the idea of doing one movement in the morning, as soon as you get up, you go down, you pop the kettle on, you're having a cup of tea. That point, first thing in the morning, what can you do? And just to say you're going to use some bands or a device, next to the kettle is where you should keep the bands or device so that it's really obvious. It's in your face, it reminds you. So it's like, right, must do that. Straight away, the chances of you doing it increase exponentially. The other thing is that with practice and repetition, your brain gets used to every morning I need to do this, every morning I need to do this, and you start to do it more automatically. So it makes a big difference. So by altering the environment and having a set time, it can really act as an additional stimulator. The other thing also, I talked a lot about cups of tea. I know that the nation runs on tea and everything else. It can be coffee. I'm more of a coffee man myself. But within that, it's to look at also an associated task. So when I make a cup of tea in the morning, I go in the kitchen, I've got my device, my bands, my rocker, whatever it is that I've got to use. And I've got a very short series of movements that I need to do first thing in the morning. So I've ticked them off and it's done. And those associations reinforce that habit for doing that rehabilitation. And it makes a very big difference to your rehabilitation over a period of time. Everybody's keen, motivation's high and everything in the first few days. But when you've done 2 weeks of doing an activity, not only does your skill level go up, the improvement level goes up, your mobility goes up, your pain starts to come down. All of those things work as feedback to help reinforce that new habit of doing the activity at that set time in the morning. So I work very much with people on keeping things as simple as possible, because habit changes, quite deep habits, require lots and lots of manipulation, and it requires you to alter small bits, and it's to work on getting used to small bit changes first. Massive drastic change requires lots of support and big changes in environment, and big support and accountability and lots of internal input. And that's quite a big thing to look at. So if you're looking at habit changes with rehabilitation and you've got things that you've got to do, so whatever rehabilitation you're doing, I always say do it at the same time. So the first time you get up, so that's not a time in the sense of the clock. It might be that at weekend you get up at 8 and in the week you get up at 6. As soon as you're in that zone, the kitchen's the best place where you're having a drink. If it takes 4 to 5 minutes for a kettle to boil and for you to process making that drink, then straight away you've got a very tiny window that you can use to do some of your movement activity. And if you've got the stimulus there, so the devices and the other pieces, the chances of you doing that on a habitual basis, on a regular basis, increases hugely. Now we know that with more repetition, things become more automatic. You get more used to doing it, and you think more about it. So you then focus on it and it becomes part of your routine. Now, the next phase for that, if we use walking as an example, is that you practice consciously to walk slightly differently. So in the example I gave, you're looking at straightening your foot. So all you're doing is just straightening your foot. So as you walk, every single step, you're straightening your foot. Now, if you think people talk lots about steps, so if you walk for something around 6 minutes at a reasonable pace, you're doing around 500 steps. It's about 400 to 500 meters, depending on how long your stride is. So that's repeating something with one foot 250 times. That's a lot of practice. But because of that, it's deemed as easy because you've got things like momentum and pace and other features, and you stop thinking about it. As soon as you stop thinking about it, what happens with your foot is it starts to turn out. So you need to constantly be correcting. And that's even with just something simple like walking. It takes quite a lot of focus. So with a walking example, I tend to find that people really start making genuine automatic improvements with some conscious walking when they've seen me for 4 or 5 sessions. So you're looking at a portion into a treatment plan. If we're looking at that individually, so some of my online clients, they take roughly 2, 3 to 4 weeks. It's that 2 to 4 weeks where people start doing things more automatically. And it depends on what they're trying to learn or what they're trying to modify. But the key thing to take from this is that if you have a consistent time, you make it really obvious and it's really short. So it takes a very small chunk of your time. Bear in mind, 95% of your life's on autopilot, and you do certain things at certain times without even thinking about it. We're all busy, so we all sleep for a period of time, we have home life for a period of time, we might have work for a period of time. So within all of that, you've only got 5% blocks, really small amounts of time. So it's really important to pick something, a small little window, to be able to change a habit. To change a habit, you invariably, from a rehabilitation perspective, need to do some movements to help you make that change. So the first step is to do your rehabilitation movements on a regular basis, and how I've outlined will help hugely. If you're then progressing where you're going to do some focus changes on, say, walking dynamics, you need to pick a time or a place or a group or a day or anything where you have that. I'm going to do this set time. I'm doing 3 minutes and I'm just focused on walking. So I've got my steps and everything, and I'm going to walk down the road for 90 seconds, really thinking about what I'm doing with my feet, what I'm doing with my body, how I'm standing, all of those things. I'm going to turn around and walk back. That's it, I've done it. But the brain has had to work really hard for that process. In doing that, it starts very quickly to pull everything together and make it more of a habit. So that when you go out and walk normally, so you go to the shops, park the car, walk to the car park, you start to walk more as you should. So with the example of your foot turning, it might not be dead straight, but it might not be as turned out because you're starting to get that habit. And that takes a little bit of time and a little bit of repetition. And depending on how complex, takes more repetition or less. But the key thing to remember is 95% of our life is run by habits and subroutines. And to slot those subroutines in, we need to break things down into very small pieces and add little changes. That way we can give it our complete focus. I'm going to be looking at habits and how to break some habits a little bit more in the next podcast. So how to change stuff and talk about things like how it feels, how it moves, how you can visualize how things should be so that it helps with reinforcing that habit change. But for today, key thing, if you're doing something from a rehabilitation point of view and you've got movements to do, set time, ideally first thing in the morning, a visual stimulus, so all the bits that you need to do it, the exercise sheet, whatever it is, next to something that's prominent. A kettle in this case is really good, and you've got a very small window to put the focus in. You'll be amazed at the difference it makes.